Hello. Britain's role in the state of Israel, Nikki Haley, and the ongoing battle in Avdiivka are the three main topics I'm going to discuss here. So, when we look at Israel, how did it come about? Well, the first sort of inklings of it were in 1840 when Lord Palmerston of Great Britain decided that Muhammad Ali had too much influence. No, not that Muhammad Ali, the Egyptian, in charge at the time, and they wanted a bulwark to that. The Baron de Rothschild, or Rothschild, in 1882, paid settlers to go and live there. Now, bear in mind that Jews, Christians, and Arabs had all lived together quite peaceably in that area. And you will, of course, hear lots of nonsense rhetoric from people like Nikki Haley and from Blinken and from the Israeli Prime Minister about all sorts of biblical stuff. Let's knock that on the head straight away, shall we? Before 1840, everybody got along just fine. And what you need to separate here is Jews from Israel, Zion. Israel and Zionism. There are many, many Jews out there protesting today against this barbaric thing that is going on. Now, let's very quickly get into this bit. If you shift all the Australians out of Australia and give it back to the Aborigines, if you shift all the Americans out and give it back to the native people, that seems an absolutely stupid thing, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly the same when they say Israel has a right to a biblical homeland and Jews have a right to a biblical homeland. It's complete nonsense. So, getting on, 1882, as I say, Rothschild and an Austrian writer in 1885 first termed the term Zionism, and in fact, Baron de Rothschild, he first of all started a place called Rishon LeZion. So that's where that comes from, 1882 and 1885. Then they had a conference in Basel in Switzerland in 1897, I believe it was, where they lobbied for a state of Israel very powerfully to the European Court of and the European states that they should have this coming up. They wanted greater influence over the Suez Canal, and in 1917, Arthur Balfour put in this enactment that enabled this state of Israel to start existing and settlers to go there. And this was along with a Zionist called Weizmann and again with Rothschild. We had the League of Nations then get involved in the early 1920s. And remember that the League of Nations were the one who were responsible for the Second World War because they put so many reparations, disastrous reparations on Germany in the after the end of the First World War that gave France almost everything that Germany owned. And that made the people incredibly poor. And then, of course, when Adolf Hitler came along, suddenly people reached out to him because he offered them hope. So the League of Nations is not exactly covering itself in glory. The other thing that we need to remember is there was a gentleman called Sir John Chancellor at the time, and many, many times the Palestinians were driven out of their homeland. Land was bought in Jaffa, and 60,000 Palestinians were displaced, and many others. And Sir John Chancellor, when the Palestinians went on strike, decided to make an example by executing quite a few Palestinians. Then we get on to Irgun, which is Jewish. Israeli, not Jewish, the Israeli army, which was a paramilitary force. And they were behind the King David Hotel bombing, to name but one or two. And then we had Lawrence of Arabia in a meeting during the Second World War with the Zionist, Weizmann, and Prince Hussein. Now, the Arabs were allowed to self-govern as long as they accepted the state of Israel. So maybe he's not quite the hero that everybody makes him out to be. There was a UN resolution in 1948 called 194, which allowed the Palestinians to go back to the land that had been occupied by by Israel, or this state of Israel, or by this Israeli paramilitary force. This is rather like turning around and saying a squatter can go back into his own, a person can go back into his own house, but he must live with the squatter who's already there. And then, of course, we had the 6 Day War, Yom Kippur, and everything like this that followed on, all sorts of deaths and recriminations. Now, nobody is not condemning what happened on October the 7th. Absolutely. If you kill men, women, and children, then you are a terrorist or a war criminal. But let's have a little bit of background here. There is a website called Breaking the Silence Israel. And if you type this into your search engine and you go and look, you will see video testimony and testimony from written testimony from Israeli soldiers about the crimes that they carried out prior to this attack. The other thing you need to realise here is when they talk about Hamas with human shields, and I'm not in any way defending Hamas whatsoever. I don't have a dog in this fight, but I'm just giving you some balance. Israelis, and there is actually testimony there from an Israeli soldier that says that they used to strap children to the hoods of the jeeps when they drove through villages so they wouldn't get rocks thrown at them, that they would strap people to tanks when firing into the Palestinian areas, that they would put Palestinian human shields up in windows while they were firing. You don't have to take my word for it. Go and look at the website, and this is Israeli soldiers themselves. Then we get on, don't we, to how this managed to happen on October the 7th. So Israel have had tons and tons of warnings. Netanyahu needs a war to save his presidency because he's deeply unpopular. America knew, and they had lots of warning. Egypt knew and even warned everybody that this was going to happen. Now, bear in mind that there was unprecedented killing for the 3 months leading up to this. And we also have factual evidence from the serial numbers that much of the arms that Hamas were able to get hold of came through Ukraine. And who armed Ukraine? Who used the grain corridor to smuggle weapons? I'll leave that in your hands. I'm sure you'll be able to work that one out. So then we had, didn't we, the most watched place you could possibly imagine of bulldozers coming through fences and paragliders coming over. No response whatsoever from the Israelis, and we have had testimony now that Israelis on the border had weapons taken away from them. So it does seem, doesn't it, that the most surveilled place had no idea that this was coming, or do you believe that? If you do, I suggest you might want to take a long, hard look at some of the evidence. So then we had Joe Biden come out and start condemning the butchering and everybody lumping on saying beheaded babies and raped women. Well, to date, there is no evidence whatsoever of any rapes of women. That doesn't excuse Hamas in one iota. There is no evidence whatsoever of beheaded babies, and indeed they had to retract it. That again doesn't excuse Hamas for what they did. It is understandable what they did, but not excusable, given all the war crimes that Israel carried out on the Palestinian people beforehand. Afterwards as well, the bombing of the hospital. I mean, please, honestly, everybody trying to blame Hamas for that one. There is, without doubt, an inhumane slaughter going on at the moment. And people turn around, there is such a thing as collective punishment, which you're not allowed to do by international law. And I don't care how many lawyers or how many people come out that will work. Killing kids is wrong, no matter which flag you are under. And while we're talking about that, there is now testimony that has been held back by the Israelis, blocked by the Israelis from coming out from 2 survivors that showed quite clearly that when Hamas had hostages on that fateful day, over 50 or 60 of them in one building alone, that Israel didn't even, they have a thing called the Hannibal Directive, which means no negotiation whatsoever with terrorists or people they consider terrorists. So what they did was they rolled up the tanks and they fired shells into the building, killing all the hostages and the Hamas that were in there alike. Basically, they didn't even try to save their own citizens. They just killed everybody in the building. And there are two people who have come out and said this, and Israel have tried to stop this testimony from coming out. So the black flag of Iran is when it's risen, is a call for mourning. It really is, but it's also a call of come to us. Um, and that much was told to me through an intermediary. I was able to speak to a member of Hezbollah who've given till Monday for the shelling to stop, and that's not going to stop. There are American carriers and American forces massing as we speak on this video. Now, the American carrier force obviously is going to go down there, and Putin's obviously warned about the fact that he does have Kinzhals in that area, so make of that what you will. The Gaza overview for them is, as far as Hezbollah are concerned, through my contact, I was able to speak to somebody in the political wing, not the obviously the military wing, because I'm not allowed to. The very, very simple fact is they believe that the overview is that Israel want to push the people out of Gaza, that America knew about it, they want a war with Iran. And they do have a point here, because within 2 hours of this rocket attack happening, everybody was saying Iran did it. Iran had supplied it, and it turned out that Ukraine had supplied it, and there was also leftover weapons from Afghanistan. Those two facts have been proven, as you can see on my Telegram channel. They have the serial numbers, everything. They are also worried that they're going to attack the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And why do they think that this is happening? Well, it's a pretty simple thing. You have to look back, and it's very, very easy to do so. And I would urge that you do this. It's not. I know that they want to wipe them out for the land grab, as Hezbollah are saying. Because it is quite clear that the murder and the killing of any civilians is an international war crime, and every single person who commits one, regardless of what flag you have in your bio, is a war criminal. Now, what you have to look at is the three countries that America have wanted to go to war with over the last few years. It has been Russia, it has been Iran, and it has been China. Well, the proxy war with Russia isn't going so well. In fact, the Ukraine have taken back less than 1% of the land that the Russians originally took, and have lost over 500,000 soldiers trying to make some sort of progress. And then we get on to China, don't we? And there's been lots and lots of threats there, and people going to visit Taiwan, and Victoria Nuland and various other dignitaries, Nancy Pelosi turning up in Taiwan just to annoy the Chinese and making all sorts of threats towards the Chinese. Well, that's not going to happen, because China have a perfectly capable force to be able to fight back with, as do Iran. But that hasn't stopped America now amassing, ready to go down there. And we can only think that it's going to be Syria, it's going to be Iran, and this might easily turn into a huge global conflict. And there's nobody talking peace, everybody's talking war. And the reason they're talking war is we're going to come on to in a minute. But there is a pipeline that Russia, Iran and China want to build. There's also another pipeline for the Eastern Med that America want to build with the aid of Turkey, with the aid of Saudi Arabia, and with the aid of India. Okay, so now you understand that they're both would like pipelines there. It is quite clear from the way they banged on about Iran that they just want to stop this pipeline. And I'll give you a clue. In Sudan, Russia were going to build an air base in Sudan. They didn't build an air base in Sudan or a naval base in Sudan because they couldn't do so if there was a conflict going on. Strangely, American people turned up in Sudan, and suddenly there was a civil war. So that put the kibosh on any Russian bases being built there. It's all about money, and it's all about pipelines. Have you any idea how much money is to be made out of this, and how much people are making from this? And while we're talking about people making money out of people dying, let's talk about the Secretary General of the UN, who has now been said should be disqualified from being in charge of the UN or being Secretary General of the UN for daring to talk peace. Now, this was put forward by Nikki Haley. Nikki, I would like you to turn around and tell me, when we're talking about war profiteering from children dying. 2017, apparently you only had $15,000 in your bank account and were $1 million in debt. Is it true that your husband and you have vast investment stock portfolio and an income of over $12 million? Is it also true that you live in a $5 million mansion and you are on the board of Boeing, a defence contractor, for $300K a year, and that you still own $250,000 worth of Boeing stock? So there you see, if war happens and you're advocating for war, suddenly you're making personal gain because Boeing stocks are going to go up. Ergo, you make more money. Did you do speaking engagements for the advocacy group United Against a Nuclear Iran, whose donors claim national security for not releasing publicly who those donors are, that it wouldn't be in the national interest and would hurt national security if we knew who was donating to that particular group. Then there's your links to Richard Kang, who's an advisor to Prison Global Management. Did you own $750,000 or $750,000 for your involvement in that group? We know that Kang serves and moves about in the defence world as an advisor to America's Frontier Fund, a former head of QTEL, and this is the CIA venture capital arm. So we know all that. Can you also tell us if your husband, Michael Haley, has his own defence contracting firm, which he made $500,000 from Allied Defence? If you could confirm or deny that, that would be great. Which overlaps with a sister company, Defence Engineering Services, which navigates, great term, legal and political problems, and they make defence systems. Can you also tell me if you've made from Microsystems aerospace manufacturing $1 million income from that? So you would see here, if any of this is true, then you are profiteering from the death of civilians in any area. And as a person who is there advocating, who was a former ambassador, surely this is insider trading. If you did this in the city, you'd be locked up in prison. And you've already been piling and pushing, as many of the neocons have, for more money for Ukraine. And that is an ongoing disaster. There is now a city called Avdiivka that the Russians are busy surrounding in the south, and there's one called Kupiansk in the north. Now, these are big places. This is not like the Ukrainian disastrous counteroffensive, which saw over 100,000 men die trying to capture about 5 or 6 different villages. And indeed, it's going so badly that Ukrainians have been surrendering in vast numbers. There is also many, many videos out there of Ukrainian press gangs basically going along, grabbing people, beating them up, putting them in a van, and the videos are out there for everybody to see. And then, of course, they're stuck on the front line after a couple of weeks of training, in which case they're either cannon fodder or they surrender, or their own side have been shelling them. And there's videos out there, quite clear proof. Many, many war crimes have also been put forward by the Ukrainians against the Russians. Turned out that it wasn't them. They weren't the ones who blasted the pharmacy, and they weren't the ones who blasted an area where 51 people died. Indeed, there is absolutely tons and tons of evidence to show that Ukraine were killing men, women, children in the Donetsk area, and are still doing it today, dropping cluster bombs on places where there's no military installations whatsoever. I'm not a friend of Russia or a friend of Ukraine, but the Ukraine regime that America overthrew in 2014, when Victoria Nuland organized through the National Endowment for Democracy, the overthrow of the democratically elected government. And they are responsible for this mess that has happened since. And a city like Avdiivka is now being surrounded by the Russians. They've captured a couple of heights, and you'll hear lots and lots of nonsense about Russian losses and Russian are fighting with shovels and they've got no this, that, and the other. No, the Ukrainians have almost no air force whatsoever. They're dying in numbers of at least 9 or 10 to 1 Russian. We're talking well over 550,000 to 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers dying for taking back less than 1% of the land that the Russians occupy. That is an absolute failure, and we are just carrying on funding. And you have to ask yourself, what is the whole purpose of this? Well, it's very, very clear and very simple. It's to keep the Russians occupied. And that didn't work because Russia have this pretty much under control. They have fewer men on the front line now than they've had since this conflict started. And of course, Ukraine are drafting absolutely anybody. They've lowered the age limit and they've raised the age limit of the people who can be drafted, including drafting women. This is, without doubt, a real turning point at the moment with the Middle East as well. And it's the neocon warmongers that at the moment pervade the all-pervading and all over the mainstream media, and even so, the interest groups. There is one out there called the Institute for the Study of War. Now, it may alarm you to know that the person in charge of that is a woman called Kimberly Kagan, who is a sister-in-law of Victoria Nuland, who was there handing out bread and cookies the day of the Maidan overthrow of the democratically elected government of Ukraine.